We can all relate to that, right? Well, then he remembered. It was a very distant memory, but he remembered a time when he was a Boy Scout. He says, ahead, I saw a bridge crossing over the Fox River. Every fall, our troop made a 2-day, 40-mile canoe journey down the Fox. And there was one year I would never forget. My dad dropped my brother and me at the launch. And he made sure that our life vests were snug and said goodbye as our flotilla set off. I plunged my paddle into the water and pulled hard, then lifted and stroked again. His brother did the same thing. And before long, we had a good rhythm going. Oh, I wish Dad could see us, he thought. About a mile downriver, we came to a bridge. I looked up, and there he was, Dad, standing right in the middle of the span. He didn't shout instructions or do anything embarrassing. He simply waved until we passed underneath. I looked back, and he was gone. Huh? Was I just imagining him? But several miles later, at the next overpass, there he was again, and the next one after that, and the next. It turned into a game. The whole troop began looking for him. Every time we rounded a bend that day, one of the other scouts would shout as they spotted my dad. All the boys were waving now, but no one was happier to see him than I was. My dad had taken a chance and literally gone the extra mile and then some to show us his love. All these years later, it never left me. Now, I drove across the bridge in the darkness. I imagined Dad standing there, waving, still encouraging me. It made me think of a nightly prayer I'd said when the kids were younger, asking God to help me be the kind of dad my kids need. At last I understood. The most important thing I could do for my children, just be there. Even if it meant going the extra mile, the way my dad did for me, cheering me on. Don't you just love that story? I do. And you know what? It's those simple acts of love and encouragement that I remember about my own dad. How he taught me and my sisters about cars. How he taught us how to check the oil to make sure that we had enough. I mean, this was especially important because the first cars we drove were real beaters. You know, used cars. Very, very used. I also remember going to the playground, and I loved to ride the merry-go-round. And nobody could push the merry-go-round like my dad. Right? He played badminton with me and my sisters. And he was pretty good at tennis. I wasn't. He tried to teach me, but I didn't get much better. But it didn't matter to me if I learned to play tennis well. I just loved to go out on the court with my dad, just to be able to spend a little time with him, just me and my dad. I also went fishing with him. Now, I wasn't very good at catching fish, but I was pretty good company for him. He liked to show me things and tell me things, and I was an eager listener and learner. And when we got home, I always helped my mom clean and cook the fish, something my other sisters didn't really care to learn. Right? Now, I imagine going fishing with your dad is as good a way as any of learning important values. They say that values are caught, not taught. I remember that if my dad caught a fish that was too small, he would carefully take it off the line and gently put that little fish back in the water. And if he didn't talk, it was good for me not to talk either. I learned that his not talking was a way for him to relax and just be with his own thoughts. But you know something? If I did have a question, I'd ask. Quietly at first, the way I sometimes heard my dad speak about his own father. And if he didn't answer right away, I figured my dad was thinking about the answer. Or he was thinking of another way to say what he'd say so many times when I asked him a question. He'd say, "Oh, Gloria, that's a mighty good question. Why don't you go and look it up?" Now, this was way before we had computers or Google or anything like information at your fingertips, right? So like a dutiful daughter, I waited until we got home. Then I'd think about, where I might find my answer in the dictionary or maybe an encyclopedia or the Bible or maybe another book that we had around our house. Or sometimes I had to go to the library to actually find the book that I was looking for. Now, that was fun for me. I mean, I loved learning, and I loved going to the library, which was about 5 or 6 blocks from our house. What was my dad doing? Well, he was teaching me how to think. He was also teaching me how to discern, and he was teaching me how to learn. Now, I've written a lot of poems, and I've written a number of poems to honor my dad. And one of my favorites is called That Autumn Morning. Autumn was my dad's favorite time of year. And in Michigan, that meant warm days, cool nights, sometimes crisp nights, and gloriously colored trees. And when the leaves fell off, those colored leaves would just spread all over the ground, and then at some point they'd start to get brown and crinkle and dry up. So this poem for my dad is called That Autumn Morning. That Autumn Morning. I'll share it with you. That autumn morning. Thinking of Robert Hayden. Now the poem begins with a little epigram from another poem. And it says, "In memory of my father, I thank God for his unconquerable soul." I remember you leaning for balance. I remember you before me listing toward earth and heaven. Leaves dry, raspy beneath our feet. Branches fallen, chrysanthemums faded, musty memories dying on mounds of autumn earth. I remember you steady, speaking of plots, as if you were talking about cars or trucks. How big? The funeral. What kind? How much? Not too fancy. Maple will do. You lifted, eased our burden, even as moment by moment your body vanished into spirit. I remember you in your seasons and say a prayer. Rainmaker, angel, guardian, I remember. My dad was a very strong yet gentle man in my life. And even though he passed away many, many years ago, he still is with me. He makes a big difference still in my life. Now, I know that not everyone is blessed to have a dad like mine, or even if they do, they don't have the kind of relationship that I have with my dad. As an undergraduate at the University of Michigan, I was very blessed to have Robert Hayden, the person that I reference in my poem, as one of my professors and mentors. I remember taking a course in English Lit with Mr. Hayden, and I recall that a lot of the class was focused on learning about poetry and learning about poets and the craft of writing good poems. And Robert Hayden is one of my favorite poets. I'm blessed to have called him mentor. This poem that I'd like to share with you is called Those Winter Sundays, and this poem is about Robert's father. Now, Robert was adopted into this family. And I remember when I was writing my own poem that autumn morning, I was actually recollecting, remembering this poem as a source of inspiration. Now, Hayden had a different kind of relationship with his dad than I had with mine. And yet, he was able to reconcile himself to his father through this poem. Those Winter Sundays. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house. Speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? Quite a poem, don't you think? I just adore the arts. I love that art can take us on a journey, whether it's a journey of gratitude, a journey of forgiveness, a journey of love and reconciliation, a journey of reflection and greater self-awareness. I love how art meets us right where we are, and then, before we even realize what happened, it has the power to heal our hearts or mend our soul or help us transform in some meaningful way right